Thank you for joining us for the Summer Security Series, episode 2 with Brian Bennett. We're just going to wait a minute to let everybody join us here this afternoon. In the last Summer Security Series, you had Ben Gremion, a peer of mine, host the event, and Ben is well known for providing some trivia for guests while we wait. And so I have to fill in his shoes. So you can throw in an answer in the chat here for anyone that wants to participate. But a legendary movie was released in U.S. theaters on this day back in, I think it was 1937. 1939. And what movie might that have been? Anybody? I was joking with my team about humming some. Bingo, Jim, nice job. The Wizard of Oz. The Wizard of Oz was released in theaters back in 1939 today. Pretty cool fun fact.
It's a Kansas thing. We all know that.
Yes, we got our number one participant there, Casper the Friendly Ghost, also joining us. Top Gun. Yeah, Top Gun coming. Well, okay, it's been 3 minutes. Again, thank you all for joining us today for Summer Security Series Part 2. And today, you have myself, Andrew Bonner, account executive out of the Raleigh market. Taking lead for just getting things kicked off. And then you also have Brian Bennett, our field CISO here at Davenport Group. And I also saw today, kind of on the same note of trivia, is it CISO or CISO? You know, tomato for folks. But a little bit about Brian Bennett. He's been with Davenport Group for 2 years. Previously an IT director for over 10 years at the Department of Defense, and has 5 years of experience acting as a strategic advisor in the role of CISO, CIO. Brian is also highly certified as it pertains to applications, networking, infrastructure, and security. So I was mentioning myself, I'm Drew Bonner, an account executive here at Davenport Group. I've been with Davenport Group for a little over a year now. Prior to joining Davenport Group, I'd spent close to 8 years in Houston, Texas, in the value-added reseller community. And outside of that, I am a father to a 15-month-old princess. Although she's been a little sick this week, she is coming past it. And I have the also unfortunate, I guess, ability to be a New York Jets fan as well. So, you know, well known for the butt fumble, I guess is probably what we're most known for, aside from Joe Namath with Mark Sanchez there. So that's a little bit about me, a little bit about Brian Bennett, our presenter here. Brian, if you want to show the next slide. For those of you that are joining us that are unfamiliar with Davenport Group, Davenport Group is over 20 years old, and we really got started in the value-added reseller space, focusing on storage solutions. And with storage solutions, we were one of Compellent's first partners, even sold some beta systems for Compellant. And at the time that Compellant was sunsetted by Dell, we had the second largest install base globally for Compellant. And because we were an initial partner of Compellant, when Dell acquired Compellant, our portfolio grew with that of matching Dell's. And as you can see on the left too, we have some other partnerships, VMware being one, Microsoft. When Dell also acquired EMC and brought on VMware, our portfolio grew yet again. So really the portfolio and services that we provide our customers have grown from just being a storage partner to one that is all-encompassing as a value-added reseller from mouse to the cloud. And even today, you know, we're going to be talking about our expertise when it comes to security and advising our customers on the security landscape. But really, there are plenty of areas where we can help you. And please feel free to reach out to myself or your Davenport Group account executive if you'd like to dive into one of these other areas, in greater detail. For the presentation that we have focused today that Brian's going to be talking about, it's really going to be taking a look at, what everyone has just survived, version 2.0 of COVID. Who knows what next version is coming. And so many of us have had to pivot to remote work. And so the conversations of remote work and security is what Brian's going to be focusing on today. But remote work also has other areas, that we are helping our customers with when it comes to infrastructure. May it be, a virtual desktop for customers, or just helping customers operate remotely. And so whatever your, new normal looks like, we can help you in that facet, not just in security, which we're going to be talking about here today. And so I think today also, please stay tuned towards the end of the session, because we'll be sharing some information on some new offerings that Davenport Group has, but also I'll be sharing the information for the cocktail toolkit that you all have earned by joining this virtual webinar today. So again, stay tuned towards the end. And Brian, I can pass the mic over to you, I believe, to get us started.
Absolutely. Appreciate it, Drew. And so good evening, or good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate you joining today. For those that have been on my webinars or any things that I've spoken, I try to always start off by giving some real world facts. I try to keep the news as relevant and as updated as possible, because this is what we are truly working with as IT leaders. And so I like to set the stage. We're talking about remote workforce. Drew mentioned it. We're dealing with COVID 2.0, and I don't see that going away anytime soon, and we don't know what's next. But we're going to look at some of the impacts of what COVID has done across the IT landscape. Since the onset of COVID, February 2020, we have seen a 600% uptick in just phishing email attempts. The threat actors, the bad guys, the bad girls, they realized where the weakest link was. They knew where to go after. They knew where the easy target was. And that's why we're seeing this huge uptick in phishing emails. And then one of the statistics that I saw just a couple weeks ago, it's still above 90% of all malware, ransomware, or any kind of compromise attempt is coming in through email. That seems to be the biggest attack vector that the bad guys and the bad girls are using. Recently, a survey was done with IT professionals as they started gathering that, we're getting real data now from what COVID did to us across the board, across all organizations. But 44% of those surveyed actually admitted that they didn't send their staff home with any kind of cybersecurity awareness training or any kind of knowledge or processes of what it would entail from working from home. What kind of security shift, what things to be aware of, what do they need to do differently, what kind of controls did the organization put in place. So you think about that. I mean, that's almost half of the employees that have went home during COVID. They thought they were working just status quo, just like they were working in the office. Of those, 68% actually admitting that they did not verify or they did not even deploy antivirus on the machines that they sent home for the remote workforce. And that's a pretty scary situation in itself. That we're dependent on, our employees to still grind every day, make sure that they don't miss a beat, make sure that the company still moves forward. But that we're sending them with tools that are unprotected. And with them being unprotected, then ultimately that leaves the organization unprotected as well. And then some numbers just around remote workforce itself. The average breach now has increased $137,000 just having remote workforces in place, in use. And we're looking at 37% of our remote workforce is accessing our corporate networks from personal devices. And so we're talking about maybe personal laptops, mobile devices. We are allowing them to connect into our data farms and access our company resources from personal devices. That has caused a 238% uptick in cyber attacks. Having those personal devices, because we don't have control of those. We don't know if those are protected, if those are patched. And so we're seeing a rise in fact of that. And then 20% of organization have now become breached just from from a remote workforce employee. So we're talking almost a quarter of the employees that get sent home. That is actually the entry vector for a corporate breach. So some of those are pretty scary, scary facts. But we're actually starting to get real good data now. And as we called it in the Army, after action review, hot wash. Now we actually get to sit down and we talk about what went right, what went wrong, what can we do better, and what can we prepare for next. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So the way I try to do that is, I try to think about it, keep it simple. It's the KISS, methodology. We keep it simple. That way we can think about the big things. We keep them at the forefront of our plans. But ultimately, it's a stack. It's a layered defense. We build upon each one of these layers to make sure that we have the tools and resources and everything in place to make sure that we are prepared for the next round, COVID 3.0, or whatever is around the corner that we don't know yet. But as we look at this, the way I kind of broke down the stack is, we're looking at access. Ultimately, the remote workforce has to get access to what they need to do their job. The corporate edge, what are they connecting to? How do we get them access into the data and resources that they need? Protection, ultimately, it's what are we doing to protect the remote workforce, protect the corporate environment, the network, the data, the processes, everything that is needed to keep the company in survival. Communication, how do we communicate with those with that remote workforce? How do we make sure that we are able to stay on top of things like we were if we were just right down the hall from one another? And then lastly is visibility, making sure that we are seeing everything that's happening. Make sure that we know what's going on. It's not like we can walk down the hall and we can peek in Bob's office and make sure that Bob's not watching Netflix again. But it goes deeper than that now. Now we have a remote workforce. We don't know where they're coming in from. And so that's the way I kind of broke down this stack that we'll go into today at various levels. The first one we talk about is access. We think about this as keys to the house. How do we get that remote workforce, the ability to access the tools and the data that they need to do the job for the organization? That's the ultimate goal. And when we think about that, our actions that we need to implement is that we make sure that we have a secure method for our employees to access that data, access those applications, and the resources they need to make sure that their work gets done. I remember years ago, I can remember a manager coming to me and say, "Hey, can you monitor an employee's traffic, what they're doing on the machine? I want to know how much work they're actually getting done." During COVID, they wanted to really see how many hours of work they were getting from an employee after having to send people home for remote workforce. But that's our job, to make sure that they can do that to the best of their ability. As we look at some of the tools and resources that it takes to make something like that happen, first and foremost is VPN. That is a secure method to allow our employees to get access to those resources and to those applications that they need in order to do their job. I seen it as COVID rolled out. One of the big pain points that was going on is companies quickly learned that things were undersized for this type of scenario. Companies quickly learned that their firewalls couldn't handle if they had to send all of their employees home and had everyone work from home at the same time. I've seen a huge uptick in VPN licenses. Companies found out quickly that some of the firewalls that they had couldn't handle that many licenses. They couldn't handle that many connections. But that's the first token that we've got to get in place. That's the first milestone is creating that secure conduit to get that workforce back in. So those are the things now that we can sit down after the fact. And did we meet that? Did we meet that threshold, or do we have room to grow? Could we do it again as we think forward in our strategic thinking? Virtual desktops. This was a very popular and hot button item very quickly. Is they quickly learned that organizations didn't have a laptop to send home with everybody. They couldn't afford to buy one, and then being able to order one became extremely difficult. So some organizations switched over to the virtual desktops. That allowed the workforce to come in from whatever kind of device, but it allowed them to securely log in to a virtual desktop environment and still do the organizational work in a secure environment. Multi-factor authentication. This one is becoming huge. I know I've talking with several of you on the call today, but this is now becoming an ultimatum from the cybersecurity insurance policy holders that this has to be implemented. If you have not seen this on your renewal yet, I assure you that you will see this within the next 18 months. Insurance policy claims have gone through the roof. I talked about it during the last webinar. It is even to the point where some insurance companies are having to close the doors because they're having to pay so much in claim that they're not able to function and ultimately have to close the doors. But insurance underwriters are requiring MFA on email access, which is not ultimately not really hard to do in an Office 365, G Suite environment. But if you're still working with Exchange on premise, there are some caveats, there are some roadblocks. But ultimately, this is becoming a requirement to get email behind MFA, as well as remote workforce. They quickly learned the risk that was opened up when we sent the entire organization home and had everyone working remotely. So now they're requiring MFA on any VPN logins. It's another layer of defense that has to be there now. And lastly, that I'm seeing a huge request is for privileged accounts. So your domain admin logins to use those privileged accounts, or even logging into your firewall possibly to manage it. MFA is being required in some areas for those types of logins as well. This is going to continue to get worse as it goes across, because they're going to quickly learn that MFA is going to need to be turned on for everywhere. And lastly is encryption. First off, the VPN, that's encrypted. So we're encrypted the traffic across the tunnel, but have we encrypted the hard drives, the data at rest that the employees are working with wherever they are remotely? The last thing that we want to happen is we send an organizational laptop home with our users, and they do the work like normal. They're knocking out their to-dos. They're not falling behind, and they have all of this sensitive company information on their laptop, and the hard drive might not be encrypted. So what happens if they leave it at Starbucks? I think everyone here knows how easy it is just to take the hard drive out of an unencrypted device, plug it into another device, and now you have access to everything that was on that hard drive. Once we turn on things like BitLocker, we take that risk away. That's mitigated. That's closed. So now that threat actor can take the hard drive out, and they can take whatever supercomputer that they want, and it's going to be years before they can get access to some of that data. But those are just some of the tools and resources that we can do now that we have time to sit down at the table and think about the planning for the next COVID 3.0. Next, we'll talk about the corporate edge. Keeping the door closed. This is ultimately the goal of being able to allow the remote users to connect. Where does that boundary begin and end? We need to make sure that it's a secure boundary. For so many years, our whole way of thinking was we got to keep everything out. Everything has to stay out. Well, now after COVID 1.0, now wait a minute, we got to let everyone come in, but we still got to keep all the other bad stuff out. And so it had to change the way that we were thinking. And we had to make sure that we had a strong solution in place that protects the corporate edge, the organizational network boundary, to still keep all of the bad stuff out, but allow the remote workforce to get access to the data, the resources, and the applications that they needed to safely and securely. As we talk about some of the resources that it would take to make sure that we have that in place is next generation firewalls. For the longest time, everyone believed that if you had a firewall and an antivirus, then you had security covered. Well, now with with the introduction of next generation firewalls, they can do so much more that we should make sure that's enabled. Our next generation firewalls can do things such as content filtering, intrusion detection and prevention. You get even into virus scanning itself, into the traffic that's coming through. Even deep packet inspection, the traffic that's coming across SSL, HTTPS. We're actually able to take that and dissect that and see what is in that traffic and see whether it's good, bad, and whether we should allow it or not. What about mechanisms in place to make sure there's no data loss? The last thing that we want is the remote workforce to be sending credit card numbers back and forth or social security numbers back and forth, and then the controls are not in place. That data is slowly leaking out. It's becoming a slow trickle of a breach itself, just because we don't have controls in place to make sure that data is not leaving the organization. Even some of the next generation firewalls, DNS filtering, making sure that we're blocking the stuff that really truly needs to be blocked. DNS filtering is verifying that the traffic, the domains that our users are wanting to go to, is relevant and is business crucial. Make sure it's not malicious intent. But we go through and we can dissect those types of things just in the firewall itself, all of the things that we could be utilizing. It's time now to go back to the table and walk through those types of, do we have these enabled? Are they configured correctly? Now that the dust has settled and we have some time to go back and review that. Protection. We want to build defense. This is where it really hits the road. These are all of the things that IT professionals will say, raise their hand and say, I'm doing this. I've got this covered. But the goal is we have to protect our assets and our data for the organization. And assets can go so many ways. Our employees are assets, so we got to make sure that we're protecting them. The devices that they're using, remotely, we got to make sure we're protecting those. The traffic, as they're talking remotely back to the corporate network, that's got to be secured. And then all of the things that we do inside of our organization, inside of the internal network, to make sure that things are protected. The ultimate goal is to mitigate the risk. And I've said it many times, and I'll probably repeat myself forever and ever, but it all revolves around risk. And we have to decide as IT professionals, are we going to pay for the risk up front? Are we going to make the investments into solutions, into process changes, policies, staffing? Or are we going to take the risk, roll the dice that we're going to pay for the risk if it is to happen to us? And it is a balancing game. I manage an IT budget. Actually, I didn't even have a budget. My CFO told me that I had a forecast. So I managed one of those for years, and I know IT budgets are getting smaller and smaller. Part of my goal is to break that mindset. We should be spending more in cybersecurity budgets. We need to be. Companies need to see what some of the cost of ransomware and compromises can be. But that's our ultimate goal, is to mitigate the risk. And we've got to be able to implement controls to do that. There's not a silver bullet. No one can tell you that whatever they're doing or whatever they're selling is going to take away all of your risk. That nothing will ever be able to get in. It's not true. But what we can do, collectively as a group, as peers, as leaders, is we can work together to take as much of that risk out of the equation as possible. We want to make that hole as small as possible. If there are some doors that we can completely close, that's great. but as long as we all understand that there will always be some risk. The bad guys have access to a whole lot more money and a whole lot more resources than you and I ever will. I remember in a past life, at a past time, worked with a group that went through ransomware. And when we made the initial call to start the negotiations for the ransom payment, we actually made that phone call into a call center. That's how many resources the threat actor group had access to, is they actually were able to stand up a call center, and the little lady on the other end of the phone said, "Hey, would you please read me the email addresses inside of your ransom note so I can properly direct your call?" That's what we're dealing with. And that's the mindset we've got to change, with the decision makers and the people that turn loose the budget, is that's our competition. They're running a valid business model and have access to way more than you or I will ever be able to. So as we look at the tools and resources, in this category here, typically whenever I speak, whether I'm doing a webinar or a conference, no one really, brings up their dirty laundry during the conversations, because nobody wants to let their skeletons out of the closet. Nobody wants to let everybody else know where they have bodies hidden. But, the same question always comes up. Like, "Hey, Brian, where do I begin? If you were me, what would be the first thing that you would do, or where would you start?" And there's typically three things that I usually bring up that I will drive home almost in every conversation, that all of us as IT leaders, if we're not doing it, we need to find a way very soon. Two of them are listed here. The first one being patching. We need to make sure that we are patching our environment. We need to make sure that our Windows, our servers are getting patched. We need to make sure that our desktops are getting patched, as well as our applications. Adobe Reader, whenever they release a security update, it needs to be thought of as no different than a Microsoft security patch. There's a reason why it's known as a security patch. If a threat actor can compromise Adobe and then use Adobe to compromise the machine, then they get to the same end goal. They just had to take an extra step. But we got to make sure that we're patching. We got to make sure that our applications are under vendor support to make sure that we can get patches. They are called security patches for a reason. I don't know the percentage, but most of the compromises that I've seen in the wild and that I've worked through or have had lived through myself, it typically revolved around a missing patch. Anybody that has on-premise Exchange, I assure you heard all of the news and all of the buzz over the last year and a half about all of the vulnerabilities that have been opened up on Microsoft Exchange and how quickly you needed to get it patched. The second one is vulnerability scanning, vulnerability management as a whole. This is very crucial. As IT leaders, this is one of the easiest things that we can do to truly find out, what we don't know. The phrase is true. You don't know what you don't know. This type of mechanism, this type of tool gives you insight into that. This is where we as, the admins of the network can find out where we have existing vulnerabilities sitting on our network. You might find out that you find that Windows 7 machine that might be in the code closet that an employee only uses to punch in their time clock. It might be sitting there, hasn't been patched in 5 years. Those types of scans will come back with a report. Most of them are broke down in a heat map. Red, yellow, green. Of course, red means it's on fire. It's something we need to address much sooner than later. But it starts giving you a picture of where you currently have risk. Attacks aren't going to come through the firewall anymore. That's a rarity. It still can happen. It's going to come from our end users. Our end users are going to click on that link, or they're going to open that attachment. They're going to turn something loose. As someone that has previously taken the ethical hacker class, that's all I need access to. Once I get in, the very first thing that I'm supposed to do is I'm supposed to scan the network. I'm supposed to see what I can see, what is visible to me. And quickly, if I see server names such as DC1 or Domain Controller 1 or Zeus. I'm pretty sure those are the servers that I want to go after first, because they probably have something that I can take from you and hold hostage until you pay me. If those are missing patches, there are free softwares and YouTube videos right now for anyone to be able to do that easily. The tool that was readily available that we had in class was called Metasploit. That type of tool can quickly identify where there's a vulnerability sitting on the network, and just with a couple keystrokes it can automatically go do its magic and give someone access. Passwords, strong passwords. I hate to use the word passwords anymore. I'm trying to make the shift to help IT professionals change the mindset and use the word passphrases. Where it used to be, we used a password, baseball 1 exclamation point. Well, to all of us, that checked the box because we met the complexity standards. We had an upper, lower, we had a special character, and we had a number. But I promise you that password is sitting inside of a rainbow table that someone can download from the internet and crack the password in a matter of minutes. We need to make the transition to passphrases. We need to start using passphrases. We need to spread that knowledge. We want to make the password more complex in length. Not necessarily, it doesn't have to be so much special characters, but length. And as we increase the character length, we increase the work factor. The work factor is how long it takes for a computer of today's compute power to ultimately run through the random strings and crack the password. So now, instead of it being password 1 exclamation point, how about we go with I love baseball number 2? I do love baseball. I'm a huge Yankees fan. I love Derek Jeter. Took my daughter up, see him on the last farewell tour as he was sweeping out. But now I have just increased the work factor and the complexity of that passphrase exponentially because I used a phrase. I made it much longer. That's the mindset we need to shift. Even NIST has actually made adjustments to their password policy and taken the changing of the frequency, pushing that out longer, and just actually requiring longer passwords. So we're seeing the shift into industry, and now we've got to, as leaders, we've got to start making those changes and implementations internally. Protecting our backup. Ultimately, there's 3 ways out of ransomware. Either one, you pay the ransom and you hope you're working with an honest pirate and that you get a decryptor key and you get your data back. 2, you have to, call and you have to order all new infrastructure, all new servers, all new PCs, and set up a parallel network and start from scratch. Or 3, you depend on your backups. If we're not testing those backups to make sure that they're viable, that would be a good place to get something drawn up on the board and get that scheduled. But also to make sure that we have multiple copies. One of the skeletons in my own closet, just the resources I had at the time, my offsite backup copy was about 2 miles away. So the same tornado could have taken out my primary copy of my backup as well as my offsite. Didn't matter how secure I made it, the same storm could have damaged and taken it out. There's things out there now that that even create an operational air gap. It can sit in a data center anywhere. The network only comes online whenever there's a backup to replicate, and then it goes back offline again, completely isolated. So now we've created that separation, that offline copy that we need, and we want to try to create some geographical separation with that. Communication, making sure that we can talk to our, make sure we can communicate with the remote workforce and do it in a secure manner. And that's the ultimate goal, is making sure we're providing methods for our employees to talk, make sure that they can interact with their coworkers, make sure they can interact with us, make sure they can share data. Whatever they're working on, we want to make sure that it gets back inside of the corporate network somehow. Providing email security, that's one of the things that we need to do. Are we ensuring that that the emails coming in to our workforce are secure, are valid, are real, and keeping the bad ones out? How about even protecting our tools, our collaboration tools that we all seem to be using now, like Microsoft Teams, SharePoint, Slack? Our endpoint protection devices, our antivirus tools, it is not scanning that data. There's tools out there specific to scan SharePoint, Microsoft Teams, repositories, Slack attachments coming through. If that's the way that we're transitioning in the future and for collaboration, we got to make sure that we have the pieces in place to make sure that those are happening. And when we look at the tools and resources with that, email protection technology, are we scanning for spam? Are we checking for phishing emails? Are we validating that the emails coming in are legit and they're not spoofed? Are we scanning attachments? Are we blocking, and trapping malicious links to make sure that, our users, when they do click on it, that they don't go somewhere that we don't want them to? Do we have cloud protection tools in place? Are we scanning our Microsoft Teams and our Slack and SharePoint to make sure that our remote workforce is not uploading a file that has a virus in it or some kind of malicious code? We need to make sure that it's trusted whenever the remote workforce shares it with everyone else back at the organization. Email encryption. I'm seeing a huge uptick in this. Are we able to effectively communicate across a secure channel with email? Most organizations do not know that they do not have this capability. Email encryption, allowing us to move those documents, share, collaborate, and making sure that it's kept inside of a secure and encrypted bucket. Lastly, visibility. Are we able to see everything happening, good, bad, or indifferent, easily and effectively now? Can we monitor and be able to quickly detect and respond to anything that is discovered? I admit, I ran a shop for 10 years and, I let my guys go home. I let them go home. I let them spend time with their family. I let them eat. I let them sleep. But who was watching everything while everyone was at home? I quickly learned what kind of resources were needed for that, to mitigate that risk. We had ransomware breakout about 3 o'clock in the morning. And by the time my first engineer got up to check for the alerts and tickets at 8 a.m., we already had 3 servers that were fully encrypted and we had 4 more that were almost encrypted. So just in a matter of 5 hours, while everyone was asleep, no one was watching, no alerts, no bells, might have been some emails that went off from our antivirus solution. That's the damage that was done. Well, just in those 5 hours probably took off 10 years of my life, because for the next 6 or 7 days, I lived in a car down in a data center in Charlotte to get the organization back up and going, making sure before we brought everything back online, that things were, clean and healthy. And as part of the leadership team of that company at the time, those types of things happening can start to impact a whole lot of other things. Revenue streams, contracts, vendors, employees. If you can't pay your employees, you're going to have a real bad day. But the one thing that we kept bringing up on our leadership team was our reputation. If it got out what happened to us, how easily it happened to us, and what it did to us, what would be the cost to our reputation? Would we get new vendors? Would we get new contracts? I mean, you can't really put a price on that. And so as we look at that, some of the tools, some of the mitigation, that we can put in place is MDR. I could do a whole separate webinar on EDR, MDR, XDR, NDR, all the DRs. They all have a specific purpose. They all have a specific place. But, when we talk about MDR, that's where we have someone helping us look at things. If we don't have a 24/7, staff that, that we have someone eyes on keyboard around the clock, that's where MDR comes into play. That's where we have to lean on someone else to help us to make sure that if something does happen at 3 o'clock in the morning, that we're able to detect it, get up and respond to it. SOC SIM, I am seeing a few requirements. It seems to be around the central part of the US right now. There are some cybersecurity insurance policy underwriters requiring a security operations center to make sure that the company does have someone looking at their cybersecurity events along with them. That's about the only place I'm seeing it. But the scary thing is if I'm seeing it there, that means someone else will see it soon. It will spread. They'll quickly learn that that's just another requirement that they can throw to either raise your rates if you don't have it, reduce the amount that they'll pay on the claim if you don't have it. They will use it, and it will take off. Having a SIM, having that centralized point where you can review all of your logs, being able to go into one pane of glass and see everything that's happening. I ran multiple tools for years, and I know many of you do as well, but you had to log into the firewall to look at the firewall logs, and they were only there for as big as the buffer was. Microsoft Windows event logs. As soon as the log file fills up, it overwrites the oldest one with the newest one. So if you went on a week's vacation, you came back, something happened, good chance there's probably no logs of it. But that's where a SIM, a centralized log server, comes into play, because now you have the capability to send all of that to one location, and you can use that one pane of glass to do your filters, to create your alerts, to help you get the notifications that you need to respond to. Around the clock staffing. I know many of you here that I've talked to, you don't have a 24/7 shop. You probably don't want a 24/7 shop. But in today's age, that's what our mind shift has to be, is we have to somehow be able to watch everything happening around the clock. To have 7 servers almost encrypted in 5 hours, if they would have started 2 hours earlier, the company I was with would have been in a whole lot more trouble than what we were. That's how quick things can happen. And with no visibility, no kind of alert, it kind of leaves us in the dark. We're rolling the dice, and we're just praying that it doesn't happen to us. And so many of you here I've talked to, many of you on this call have gone through my security assessment. I always bring it up. It's something that I've taken my knowledge working back in the DoD. Everything was a framework. Everything was black and white. Everything was built off of a process. I've taken that and I've built a custom tailored security assessment. It goes through about 150 security controls in 20 different areas of your IT organization. We talk about things from asset management to antivirus, disaster recovery, even incident response plans. But right now I'm offering it at no cost, because what I want to do is pass the knowledge on to the next guy. My purpose is to make sure that I make the security realm somehow more secure. If I can teach one person, pass it on, and they pay it forward, then I'm doing my job. And that's what this does, is we go through these, we talk about your environment, we see what things are close to best practice, where we might be falling short. And then if we were sitting down at a table and me on the other side is your CISO, these would be the things that I would draw out that maybe we need to start first for the biggest impact, biggest bang for the buck, if you will, to start securing your organization more than what it was when we started with the assessment. So definitely, if it's something that interests you, feel free to reach out to your Davenport group account executive. Most of you have my contact information. Feel free, and we can get something set up. It usually takes about 90 minutes to go through the security assessment. So 1 or 2 cups of coffee. I think the record on the books right now is 7 hours. I done for one of our customers, but they really had good questions. They had good feedback. It was a lot of Q&A. It's like, okay, so you tell me that, and then they would follow up, like, where would I begin? What would it take to tighten something like that down? So if you want a good idea of where you stand, definitely let's get something scheduled up. And then hot off the press, just starting getting approvals for everything this morning. But Davenport Group is starting to offer a new program. We're calling it Davenport Group Secure. So it's our new security offering that we're putting together, and it's going to be a customizable, security solution, truly from the edge to the endpoint and everything in between. And part of that is going to be virtual CISO advisory services. As I've done and these security assessments, and I've got some of the feedback from you and your peers, A lot of times I get asked that question is, where do I begin? Would you be willing to meet with me and help me get something set up, to get something on track, or even hold me accountable? That's what this type of engagement would be. And it truly is focused on a strategic security, a layered defense, holistic approach. We want to make sure that we minimize those security gaps wherever we can detect them. We're going to have reporting and actionable data. That way we can see, where we were and what we've accomplished and where we're going. And some of it will include ongoing testing, training, security road mapping, to make sure that we all stay on track, to make sure that you are pushed to help secure your environment more than where you are now. The first leg of this that we are going to release is DG Secure Advise. It will include the vCISO advisory services. We'll have it's like scheduled monthly meetings, quarterly meetings. We'll do check-ins, and we can do accountability. Dark web credential monitoring. We're going to start monitoring the internet and tell you where you currently have some of your user passwords compromised. Letting you know where people that have used their organizational email to sign up for accounts that might be compromised now. South Colonial Pipeline was compromised. A password was sold on the dark web. And then they used that to log into VPN. That's the type of stuff that the credential monitoring will help bring awareness to. We will also include security awareness training, simulated phishing tests. I told you there were 3 things that I always tell people where to start when they ask me. The third one is training our end users. They are our weakest link. They will always be our weakest link. If we're not training our end users, then that is the piece where we really, truly need to begin to strengthen our security posture as a whole. And we still have optional services right now. We can set up a frequency-based penetration test to make sure that you can see how well your security solutions and your configurations are working. The easiest way to test them is to pay a bad guy to come at you. See what they can see. How fast can they get in? What can they see when they get in? But then that gives you real world depiction and a perception of what you might look like to the bad guys and girls out there trying to knock on your door. And right here, I'll stop. I'm going to open it up for questions, and I will turn it over to Drew and see if there's anything that's come in.
Hey, thanks, Brian. I don't think I've seen anything in the chat at this point, but maybe I'll pause for a second and see if there's anybody out there that does want to come off mute and ask a question. Give it a minute. And well, Brian, I do have a question because, and it's really kind of 2 questions, and these are things that come up in every conversation that I have with customers, and this is going back a handful of years now, even back in Texas. So you talked about like cyber security insurance policies, and I feel like insurance policies, staying true with them are like staying true with your Microsoft licensing these days. The Microsoft licensing will change on a quarterly basis. Your requirements for insurance policies are going to be changing on a quarterly basis, and it's just hard to keep up with, right? So, what is out there for customers to make that compliance easier? What are you seeing for that piece around the insurance policies?
Good question. And Drew, I mentioned part of it earlier this afternoon. First off is we're seeing a requirement now for multi-factor authentication. I would definitely get ahead of the curve, get ahead of the ball game if you're not under the gun, but look into getting MFA in place. At least look at locking down email, protecting email with MFA, as well as being able to use your privileged accounts internally. And definitely across the board, everybody's VPN should have MFA turned on for that. Additionally, what I have seen as I've worked with some of our customers and they have shared their policy with me, a lot of people do not know that there's some fine black and white there in their agreement in their policy that says that they are patching their machines, that they are protecting their machines, and other types of fine print material that insurance companies are quickly coming back with whenever customers are, opening up a claim. They're using that fine print to reduce how much they will pay out, or I have seen them flat out refuse to pay a claim because they find out that they're still using a Windows Server 2008. That is an end of a life box. The insurance companies are coming back saying, hey, you signed this agreement 12 months ago. You said that everything that you had was under support, and we're just going to have to deny the claim because you have this Server 2008 box. So the first thing that I'll recommend outside of MFA is pull down your policy. Get a copy of your policy from whoever maybe it's your compliance or HR, whoever's the keeper of that. But dig into the fine print. Make sure you truly understand what you have signed your signature to, and make sure that if you are not doing it, that you start getting that plan in place to cover down on those. Good question,
Thanks,
Drew.
Brian. And I know that there was a question, in the chat here. It looks like trying to dive a little bit deeper on some recommendations that you could make. And that was Chris Clay. Thank you for asking that, Chris. And then also seeing some kind of organic answers coming in through the chat. Looks like we could probably have some follow-ups on these topics. If anybody else is thinking, questions about insurance policies here and what the changes are coming, as you hear from Brian, we can dive into your specific needs and work to address what you're looking for there, make some recommendations. Our team works very closely with RSA. Internally, we use Duo, as I know Duo was mentioned in the chat as well, but there's also some native things done with your Microsoft licensing as well that you may already be entitled to, depending on the type of licensing that you have with Microsoft. So, happy to dive deeper into that for you, Chris, or anybody else that may be, wondering some of these things. And second question I had, Brian, is around, I guess, for a lot of the customers, you talked about this, the greatest risk out there is ultimately protecting the end users from themselves. And it seems like mission impossible, I guess. No tool is great enough that it will stop an end user from clicking, I want $100 from Amazon, yippee, click the link. But I think also you talked about some, SOCs being available for customers. How do you get a customer staff, 24/7, for these types of topics? Like, what are we doing? What are we recommending for customers around this, mission impossible, right? Protecting end users from themselves.
Another good question. And I kind of look at it in two parts. First part is something that we as IT leaders can do. It's probably one of the biggest band-aids that I've ever had to rip off in my career, and that's taking back the admin rights from our local users, making sure that their account does not have admin access to the machine that they work on a daily basis. The reason I say that is because if they are the ones, or when they do open up that attachment, or when they do click on that link, they're not going to be allowed to install anything. Nothing is going to be allowed to run. Knowing that that's the weakest link, knowing that's going to be the entry point, I would start there first and pull back admin rights from the Band-Aid. Rip off the Band-Aid and pull admin rights back. I have been told in a previous life, we were a huge SolidWorks and CATIA user, and they came back to us and said, no, all of the engineers, anybody that uses that software has to be an admin. I will tell you that is an incorrect statement. That is their lazy way of saying that they don't want to take the time to show you how to tighten it down. I worked with SolidWorks, I worked with CATIA. We got both of those to work to run as a non-admin. So it can be done. It is painful, but the other side of it, it would be painful for us if that user did click on the attachment and turn something loose in the wild, and then every other user had admin rights and it just spread like wildfire. The second part is, like I mentioned, one of the top three things that I always tell people when they ask me is train our end users. Get a security awareness program established. Make sure that whenever we onboard new hires that we're setting the expectations of what we what we expect from them as a cybersecurity posture stance, as well as send out reinforcing training, making sure that they are getting trained on how to recognize and respond to how the threats are changing, coming at them on a daily basis. And it's coming at them on a daily basis. Some just might not be making it through. But those are the two places I would definitely start to protect the end user from themselves. But another good question, Drew.
And I guess we got a question about the DG Secure. Would these types of recommendations that you're making live with us, is that something that would be pivoted into DG Secure? And is there anything that you can share as it pertains to pricing around that? Do we know yet?
Pricing, no. Definitely ping your Davenport group account executive, and we can start talking about pricing. It's going to be on a per user, based off of a per user size of your organization. But as far as the things that I talked about, yes, that is part of the reason why I put together this bundle first. The security awareness and training, the simulated phishing, and as well as the compromised password monitoring. Those areas are of great concern, and those are easy things that we can do right now to get an idea of what's out there for sale that might be used against us, as well as it starts to close the security gap on our weakest link by providing our users with training, making sure they start becoming more aware. But yes, that's definitely the intent of why I wanted to start there. Good.
Thanks, Brian. So we go to the next slide here as we look to wrap up, folks. Episode 3 of the Summer Security Series is September 22nd, in which we'll be taking a deeper dive around data protection, cyber recovery, and some of the portfolio solutions that Dell provides in conjunction with our team and what we provide in helping customers in that area. And then lastly, as I mentioned at the top of this meeting, Brian, will you go to the next slide? We thank you for joining us for this episode of the Summer Security Series. And to access your cocktail accessory kit, please send an email to marketing@davenportgroup.com with the code word security. Another option other than the cocktail accessory kit is a $50 gift card to Williams and Sonoma. So again, please send that email to marketing@davenportgroup.com with security, and please identify which gift you would prefer for attending today's session. Brian, thank you so much for your time, and audience, thank you for the comments in the chat. Looks like there were some questions, possibly topics of discussion that we could look to follow up with on a later call. So feel free to reach out to myself or your local account executive, even Brian Bennett, so that we can continue the conversation. But thank you all. Have a good rest of your afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.